I've been doing a lot of mixing lately, and I've realized a few things about it. Really, it's not as difficult as we make it seem. It really comes down to like 3 things. Are all the instruments and elements loud enough? Do the tones sound good and they're not interrupting each other? And are we pushing it enough? And the pushing thing is really what the whole topic today is about. So I think in general, we think that we're hired to mix a song, and that's cool, but really what we're doing is trying to make sure that the song sounds as best as possible. So sometimes you need to either remove an instrument completely or tuck it and just hope that the band doesn't notice, and if they do, they say raise that instrument that sounds like it's gone. Or, you know, we can totally add a clap, you can add an 808 on a bass drum, you can add anything that you need to make the chorus sound bigger. So a lot of the times, that's what I'm doing. Like, the chorus doesn't sound big enough, so I find in my library of all my sounds, because I also like produce hip hop and stuff like that, I've got thousands of drum samples. So sometimes, you know, a metal song or a rock song doesn't need to be triggered with a metal kick. What it needs is like a hip hop kick or a clap on the snare. A lot of times that's what mixing comes down to. And it's about pushing it. So what I mean by pushing it is saturating the hell out of things. Like, are the vocals distorted enough? Is the room mic loud enough? A lot of the times our drums can sound really thin and really just boring because, for one, our overheads we haven't got right. It took me a while to realize that my mixes were sounding pretty dull because I wasn't really pushing the overheads and the cymbals enough, and sometimes we're lacking that brightness. So there's many ways to go about brightness. We can obviously like add EQ and stuff like that, but sometimes you don't really need that much high end on your overheads or your cymbals because they're all high end. All you need is volume. So you don't have to like push like 8K or 3K or anything like that. Just make sure that the overheads are loud enough and you're gonna notice that your mix sounds a lot fuller. Another thing to do with drums, sometimes we feel like our mix sounds not bassy enough. I can't tell you the amount of times that it's just been because my kick drum's not loud enough. A while ago I changed my whole mixing approach, and I basically used to use my bass track as my sub track, and I used to use my kick drum as just like the kick drum. But I realized I was getting a lot of issues because my kick drum was happening at moments that the bass wasn't, and then my mix just completely fell apart. So as soon as I realized that, okay, my kick drum is gonna be pretty strong with the 60 hertz and lower, and with my bass, I'm gonna cut 30, and I'm not really gonna do very much sub on the bass because the kick drum's got it. And a lot of times I'm just side chaining stuff. I know this is just like topic after topic and idea after idea. I'm just kind of freestyling this. And yeah, just side chaining everything. Basically, your kick drum and your bass need to be side chained. So every time your kick drum goes off, your bass should be dropped either as a whole instrument or just the sub frequencies. Same thing with guitars and snares. Every time the snare happens, you should be able to have your guitars duck a bit. It won't be noticeable, but you're gonna notice that your kick drum and your snare drum pop a lot more because the 2 problem instruments are getting dropped. So I'm sure we've all been down the rabbit hole. We've watched Hardcore Music Studio's cheat sheet and looked at all the frequencies, the magic frequencies for kick drum, bass, guitar, and stuff like that. You might be a part of URM, Nail the Mix, and stuff like that, and everybody's telling you these frequencies that are the magic frequencies for each instrument, and that's totally true. I'm not discrediting that at all, but there's only so far you'll go by knowing which frequencies work, you know? You can be like, oh, my guitar sounds amazing on its own, and then you put it in the mix and you're like, why does everything sound like shit? And the truth is, listen to any modern metal mix, the guitars aren't very loud at all. It's weird. Like, I, for a while, was like, oh, this mix is crazy. Like, how do I get my guitars to pop like that? And then I'd listen and be like, oh, my guitars are actually louder than these ones, but my drums don't sound loud enough. So if you listen to a mix, a modern metal mix, it's basically drums and vocals are the forefront. Everything else is just like, okay, it's as loud as it needs to be. I know that's like an open-ended, ongoing topic of what it needs to be, but really, as long as the vocals are loud enough, as long as you can hear the kick and snare and the cymbals are pushing that brightness, just kind of raise everything to the point where you can hear it and don't worry about it being overly loud. The band will let you know if they want the guitars louder or something like that. And normally they don't, because what you're listening to is the vocals and the snare drum and the kick. But as well as the snare drum, kick, and vocals, I would say that my mixes have gotten drastically better just by raising my room mics on the drums. Honestly, like, so much tone comes from the room mics, whether you're using program drums or whether you actually track drums. And you can either gate the room to your snare, or you can compress it to your snare, or you can do both. That way, you know, it only goes off when the snare is going. Or if you're like, okay, well, I actually like what it's doing to the cymbals and to the drums, then you can duck it a little bit every time the kick happens or something like that. Most programmed drums, or most, when you're recording drums, you have 2 sets of room mics. There's usually like a close room and a far room. What I typically like to do is use the close room for my kick. So every time the kick goes off, I'm kind of compressing to the kick so that it ducks a bit, but it's also like mostly kick. And then on my snare drum is really where the far rooms are exploding. And I'll either gate them or as well compress them. It really depends on the song, really depends on what's needed from it. And apart from that, honestly, taking the initiative to add extra layers when it comes to drums. So when the chorus happens, I've already mentioned the whole clap and stuff like that. I usually trigger the chorus with some sort of room snare. That way, every time the chorus comes or when the big breakdown happens, there's this room sound that it sounds convincing to the actual drum takes, even though it's a room sample that I have from like a pack I bought 5 years ago or something like that. It makes a huge impact. The final step is really when it comes down to mixing vocals, and adding that cherry on top is all of the vocal production. So I know you might be thinking like, that's kind of the producer's job to tell me where the reverb should be and where the delay throws should be like that, and like ping pong delays, whatever. But who says you can't do it? If anything, the band's just gonna be like, hey, I don't really like that one throw there, but every other one's really cool. I honestly don't think I've ever been told to take a reverb throw out or a delay throw out, because I know, I use my ear, I listen to the song, I'm like, okay, there's no vocals happening for like 3 seconds, why don't we do some cool kind of like delay throw or something like that? Sometimes the band will send you that, but usually they don't. Usually it's just like, here's the vocals, here's some effects, you can use the effects, whatever. And that really takes the step up, and that makes the band want to come back to you because they see that you've actually taken the care to add to their song. And like I said, like rarely do they ever tell you to get rid of it. So aside from that, deciding what kind of distortion and how much distortion is going on all of your instruments, how much saturation is going on your vocal, it really comes down to taste, and you're gonna develop it more and more. Just don't be afraid to push your mix. That's what's really stopping you from having a sick mix. It's just, we do what's safe, and then that's it. Every time I do a mix, even if I'm using a template, I try something I've never tried before, because I'm like, oh, this might be cool. And then, to be honest, like 90% of the time it doesn't work, but 10% of that time, I find something that's really cool, and I still stick with it. And one of the things that I've stuck with is right here in this video right here. Check it out if you're interested in getting your guitars to sound as thick as possible. Thanks so much, see you next time. Let me know if you like this kind of format where I just talk to the camera and don't do B-roll or anything like that. I like it, I don't know. Thank you, see you next time.